Good evening from New York. I'm Velshi in for Chris Hayes. It may not seem like it, but today was an historic day on Capitol Hill. Today, House Democrats officially began an impeachment inquiry into President Trump. The House Judiciary Committee voted along party lines to approve the rules for a, quote, investigation to determine whether to recommend articles of impeachment with respect to President Donald J. Trump. It is the first impeachment inquiry opened into a president since Bill Clinton, and only the third in the last 150 years. House Judiciary Committee Chair Jerry Nadler said the new rules will take effect next week when Trump's first campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, is expected to testify. Here's how he explained the scope of the investigation.
This committee is engaged in an investigation that will allow us to determine whether to recommend articles of impeachment with respect to President Trump. That is what we are doing. Some call this process an impeachment inquiry. Some call it an impeachment investigation. There's no legal difference between these terms, and I no longer care to argue about the nomenclature. Let me clear up any remaining doubt. The conduct under investigation poses a threat to our democracy. We have an obligation to respond to this threat, and we are doing so.
Now, Republicans on the Judiciary Committee fought back against today's vote, complaining about Hillary Clinton's campaign, calling Robert Mueller's testimony a flop, and falsely arguing that Democrats were violating House procedure with this vote.
In the 206 years that this committee has sat, it has never conducted an impeachment proceeding without first being authorized to do so by a vote of the full House.
That is, in fact, not true. When Democrats began impeachment proceedings against President Nixon in October of 1973, they did it in exactly the same way, with a House Judiciary vote laying out the ground rules. The New York Times described it this way 46 years ago, quote, the resolution itself finally passed on third roll call division along party lines. Thus began the second formal inquiry in the nation's history. Republicans also questioned whether Democrats were serious about impeachment or just trying to satisfy their base. Rhode Island Democrat David Cicilline left little room for misunderstanding.
So again, I ask, are you conducting an impeachment inquiry or not? If you are, just be honest with the American people.
Will the gentleman yield so we can answer his question?
No, I yield.
So the answer is yes. We are engaged in an impeachment investigation.
We are engaged in an impeachment investigation. The Washington Post reports that a group of House Democrats on the Judiciary Committee has begun privately mapping a list of possible charges against President Trump, sketching out the contours of potential articles of impeachment, even as House leaders publicly resist taking such action. I should tell you, a Judiciary Committee spokesman told NBC News in a carefully worded statement, quote, any suggestion that such articles have already been drafted or that the committee's work is already concluded is categorically false. But the train has now left the station, and there's no longer a question about if congressional Democrats will hold an impeachment inquiry. The question now is what happens next. Joining me to help answer that question is one of the congresspeople leading this impeachment inquiry, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He's a member of both the Judiciary and Oversight Committees. Congressman, thank you for being with us tonight.
And thanks for having me.
Tell me and tell our viewers what today means. What has happened? What makes this different than yesterday?
Well, we just set the rules forward for the hearings. The chairman of the committee, Mr. Nadler, will be able to designate certain hearings as part of the impeachment investigation, both at the committee level and the subcommittee level. And then there will be 30 minutes of questioning by staff after the traditional 5 minutes each for each of the members. And President Trump will have a chance to essentially reply to anything that he wants so that he'll have a chance for his fair ups. We're trying to make it as even as possible as we go forward. So now we can put behind us this whole debate about internal congressional process that the public doesn't really care about and focus on the question of presidential misconduct and what's been taking place in the White House. And I think that the critical substantive change that's going to happen here is we are broadening out considerably from what was detailed in the Mueller report to look at a whole series of other charges. And my own personal focus, at least for the next several weeks, is going to be the question of the president's use of the office as an instrument of self-enrichment and the self-dealing, which violates the domestic emoluments clause and the foreign government emoluments clause, as this president has pocketed millions of dollars from foreign government agents and actors like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Indonesia, and so on.
What do you think that this investigation can achieve that hasn't been achieved by the Southern District of New York, the Mueller investigation, other than the obvious impeachment? What do you hope you uncover that hasn't been uncovered?
Well, the Mueller report was sharply limited on its own terms to an investigation into the 2016 massive and systematic interference in our election by the Russians, and then the president's repeated attempts to obstruct the investigation into the role that his campaign played in welcoming the Russian interference. But that's a very small part of the overall picture, and I think it also leaves the public somewhat befuddled as to what motivated that. And I think the critical clue was offered by the president himself when he said that if the Mueller investigation looked at his finances, he would blow the whole thing up. And that tells us precisely where we need to start. This has been a money-making operation from day one. The president has steered millions of dollars into the hotels, the office tower, and other business ventures around the world with engagements with foreign governments. And he's also steered millions of dollars in taxpayer money into the hotels and resorts and golf courses where he's spent 1/3 of his days since entering office. Imagine if Barack Obama had spent 1/3 of his days in Martha's Vineyard, and the Secret Service and the Department of Defense and the FBI and everybody had to pay on the government's tab to stay at the Barack Obama Hotel. The Republicans would have been calling for impeachment, months and months ago, and it's all they would be talking about.
Let me ask you about this.
They're still talking about Hillary Clinton's emails. So.
Let me ask you about this. I know you say we can put behind us the machinations of Congress that a lot of people are not interested in. There are some people, including Nancy Pelosi, who think this is a dangerous road to go down. She has articulated that. Tell me where we are today. Has Nadler just sort of ignored that and is moving ahead?
No, because it's never dangerous in a democracy to find the truth. And I think Speaker Pelosi is totally with the program. Our caucus is completely unified in trying to expose and counter all of the lawlessness and corruption emanating from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. We're all together on that. Now, everybody has a different inclination as to what's going to happen as an end game, but I think there are very few people who feel certain about what should be done. And remember, there's a whole range of responses here. I know that the media has tried to cast it as just, do you impeach or do you not impeach? But there are a lot of other things that can happen. And the major thing is for the truth to come out, because democracy needs to have a foundation. And